Reverend Sun Myung Moon. Let us untie the knot. Chungpadong Church, Seoul, Korea, March 24, 1957. Matthew 18:15 through 20. God's love operates in places where there is harmony. Even in yourself, God's love operates on top of the place where the body joins in harmony, centering on the mind. Going one step further, God's love operates at the place where families, nations, the world, and heaven come together in harmony. If all created beings had set the standard of goodness by which they could rejoice for eternity in harmony, centering on God's love, there would not have been any walls between things, even in the human world, because they could not become united centering on God's love. The minds and bodies of individuals could not be in harmony. Furthermore, among neighbors or clansmen, different people could not come together in harmony. Nations, the world, and heaven could not become one. The purpose of God's dispensation of restoration is to establish one person who can bring harmony to this world of creation that is in discord. Centering on that person, the scope of love should expand to dismantle the barriers that stand between individuals, families, nations, and the world, and heaven. The purpose of the dispensational history of restoration is finding this one person who can bring harmony to all things. Jesus was the person who came as the realization of the history of restoration, or as the standard and center of love before all things. His purpose was to resolve all that had been entangled in heaven and earth. Therefore, humanity can only remove the faults of the original sin caused by the fall, in other words, the conditions of the fall, through Jesus Christ. The reason is that although man has to eliminate the condition of the fall by himself, since he is the one who set the condition on earth, fallen man by himself cannot resolve it. It can only be removed through the Messiah. Human beings should have become one with Jesus to eliminate the grief and resentment that have saturated heaven and earth because of Adam, and return joy before heaven. Because they killed Jesus, that will could not bear fruit on earth, but still remains unfulfilled. Even after his death until today, Jesus has been trying to resolve the situation through you. He has been working for 2,000 years with an unchanging heart. You must realize that every move you make, you who are the hope of Jesus, must never be centered on you, but on the movements of the historical being of culmination, who must bring resolution to the ordeals of heaven, which have been accumulating for 6,000 years. As this kind of being, you must understand that the infinite grief of the prophets and sages of Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and God are entangled before you. The hope of Jesus, who represents the bitterness of God from the 4,000-year history prior to his advent, and the hope of the Holy Spirit throughout the 2,000 years since Jesus' death, are also entangled. Therefore, your one body must, as an individual, dismantle all the barriers of grief that stand between brothers, nations, the world, and heaven. Otherwise, the historical grief that is pent up in Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and God can never be removed, and God cannot love or rejoice through you. You must make a firm determination to take on this great historical mission in your one generation and accomplish it during your life. Going one step further, you must be determined to complete the mission that you have taken on before heaven, even by working through your descendants. Jesus was the person who taught the way to resolve the situations that are deeply rooted in heaven and earth. Understanding that he was the one who must eliminate God's grief of 4,000 years, Jesus spent his whole life in desperate anxiety in his attempt to bring resolution to those deeply rooted situations. Not only that, Jesus' life was not centered on himself. It was a life that focused only on solving all kinds of situations that came into being because of Adam. Jesus has carried on the mission of restoring the fall of man. At the same time, he has carried on the mission of restoring even Satan to the original position from which he fell. This was because he knew that since Satan committed sin on earth, he must also be restored on earth. Although human beings fell because of their own mistake, God is still trying to raise them up as the children who can receive his love again. Moreover, the day of judgment is not the day that the criminals who do not believe in the faith are thrown into prisons. It is the day when even the sinners who are the causes of the grief of Jesus and the Holy Spirit are restored to heaven's side. This is the dispensation of God and the task that remains for the new era. You must take charge of this entire mission with Jesus. To do that, you must feel the heart of Jesus, who alone took on God's lament of the 4,000 years during his life. You must feel the anxious heart of Jesus and the Holy Spirit, which has continued for the 2,000 years since the resurrection until today. If you, who have taken responsibility to conclude the 6,000-year history, cannot exert yourself more than Jesus, the prophets and sages, then you will never be able to secure your original position on which you deserve to stand. Since God has spent 4,000 years finding one person, Jesus, and spent 2,000 years finding one bride, in order for you to find yourself, you must emerge while possessing in entirety the circumstances of the ordeals of God, who has lived 6,000 years governed by tremendous sorrow. Similarly, to find and establish yourself, you must fight. In your battle, you must first fight with yourself. Jesus struck himself before he struck Satan. By doing so, he could strike even Satan. We must also strike ourselves before we strike Satan, and then fight with Satan. To walk through the course of these ordeals and agony, you need some comrade who can recognize you even if everyone abandons you. You should understand that when Jesus was passing through the crucial moment on the cross, although humanity abandoned Jesus, God and the Holy Spirit were in the position to recognize him. Even when he faced the fate of being abandoned by God, the Holy Spirit was in the position to recognize him. There will come a time when God will also pretend not to know you. So at that moment, you need some comrade who can act in the role of the Holy Spirit. When humanity abandons you, you need some person who can act in the place of God. So you must learn to attend that kind of person. Consequently, Jesus said that when two people join their hearts to pray, the Father in heaven will bring it to pass. In the same way that God entrusted the mission to Jesus, rest assured that you must also receive Jesus and the Holy Spirit by taking on the responsibility for the will of Jesus and the Holy Spirit. In order for God to become your Father and for Jesus and the Holy Spirit to become yours, you must take charge of the anxious situation they face and become the champion who is entrusted with the mission of heaven. You must make them rest assured. It is difficult just to bear the burden of our brother and relieve his worries. How much more difficult is it to bear the burdens of God? However, heaven has been hoping for such champions to establish them on earth, and Jesus and the Holy Spirit have been waiting. All created things hoped for this. Therefore, wherever there are two of these champions who unite their hearts in prayer, God cannot but be present. The more of these champions there are, the more people that can inherit the great mission of heaven. In the last days, it will become the center of blessing for the whole world. In this time of intersection, the last days, you must all become the champions of goodness to exterminate evil and filter out goodness, so that Satan can overcome the position of tying the knot and untie it. God can then take the position of knotting in order to lay the central foundation that can represent the will of God. Then, since it was God who tied the knot, there's no one who can untie it. Furthermore, you can represent the universe as the true sons and daughters of heaven for limitless eternity.